I grabbed the consecrated host from the altar of St. Peter's Catholic Cathedral in Accra, Ghana, during Sunday Mass with 7 men behind me, and I ran. I made it exactly 4 steps before my legs stopped working. Every one of my men went down the same way, not from anything any person in that building did to us, not from anything physical at all. And what happened on that cathedral floor in the seconds that followed is something I have spent years trying to describe accurately and have never fully managed. Have you ever been so certain that nothing would stop you, that when something did, the impossibility of it was more frightening than anything the something itself could have done? My name is Abdul Karim Osei Al-Farouk. I am 29 years old, and on the morning of October 14th, 2018, I led 7 men into St. Peter's Catholic Cathedral on Accra Central's Castle Road during the celebration of Sunday Mass, took the consecrated Eucharist from the hands of the priest at the altar, and ran. I had no idea that the 4 steps I managed to take were the last 4 steps of my old life, and that what met me on the floor of that cathedral would dismantle every certainty I had spent 29 years building. I grew up in the Nima neighborhood of Accra, in a Ghanaian Muslim community that carried its faith with the self-possession of people who had been a minority in a Christian-majority country for generations and had never once apologized for it. My father, Alhaji Karim Ibrahim Al-Farouk, was an imam at the Nima Central Mosque and had studied Islamic jurisprudence at Al-Azhar University in Cairo before returning to Ghana to lead a congregation he served for over 20 years. He was a tall, still man who said few unnecessary words and whose silences carried more authority than most people's speeches. My mother, Hawa, ran a full Quran school from our family compound, 20 to 30 children on any given afternoon, sitting in rows, reciting, the sound of it filling the compound from Asr through Maghrib. I was her first student before I could read anything else. Faith was the mother tongue of our household. Everything else was translation. I memorized the complete Quran at 16. My father arranged a gathering at the mosque, and men from 3 neighboring communities came, and the prayers they offered over me that afternoon settled into my chest in a way I still carry. While other boys in Nima ran to the football pitch or gathered at the roadside spots, I was studying tafsir and sitting in my father's study circles, listening to men who had spent decades in conversation with the tradition. I fasted every Ramadan without complaint from the age of 9, added voluntary fasts regularly, prayed every prayer without exception. I was not performing for anyone. The faith was the realest thing in my life, and I gave it everything because anything less felt dishonest. My father taught me about Christianity with the precision he brought to everything. Christians had received revelation and corrupted it through a drift of institutional theology that had moved far from the original message given to the prophet Isa. The Trinity was the most visible result of that drift. The Eucharist, bread declared to be the literal body of Jesus Christ, was shirk in its most ritualized form. By 20, I had joined a Muslim advocacy organization in Accra, resisting Christian missionary expansion in the city's Muslim communities. We organized outside churches, challenged church construction, engaged Christian leaders publicly. I believed this work was as integral to my faith as prayer itself. By 28, I was a project manager at a civil engineering firm in East Legon, building a solid reputation, earning well. I was engaged to a woman named Fatou, a Ghanaian Malian woman whose father led a mosque in Kumasi and who carried her faith with a completeness that made me trust her immediately. We were to be married in the spring. I had everything: work, community, family, faith, a future that had its shape clearly defined. Ask yourself this question: have you ever looked at your life and found it so complete that the idea of a different kind of life felt not like possibility, but like irrelevance? The trigger came in September of 2018. A senior member of our organization, Brother Kofi, brought a recording to one of our meetings. A Catholic priest broadcasting homilies on local Christian radio, describing the Eucharist as not metaphor but living presence, available to anyone who came with sincerity, including Muslims genuinely searching for God. Brother Kofi set the phone down and said a priest was using the radio to invite Muslims to worship bread, and that our silence was the same as endorsement. The plan formed over 2 meetings. We would attend Sunday Mass at St. Peter's. At communion, I would take the host from the priest, and we would leave, take it out of the building, show everyone it could be taken, that the Jesus they said lived inside it was unable to defend what was his. I volunteered immediately. I had no idea that the plan I designed as a demonstration of powerlessness was going to become the most powerful encounter of my life. I chose 6 men carefully. Kwame, a university lecturer in Islamic studies, whose command of theological argument was the best I had encountered. Musa, who had grown up beside a church in Asylum Down and had years of accumulated friction with everything that building represented. Idris, my closest friend since we were 14 in Nima, who had never questioned whether following me was the right decision. We visited St. Peter's Cathedral twice as visitors, moving through the building during weekday hours, mapping the nave, the altar approach, the positions of the ushers, the side exits. During communion, the priest stood at the foot of the altar steps, distributing the host to the congregation as they came forward in a line. We would enter during that distribution, move fast down the center aisle. I would take the host, and we would go directly to the side exit on the right. The plan was clean, and my confidence in it was total. Have you ever been so certain a plan was right that you never once put it through the test of a single, honest question? The night before, I prayed tahajjud alone in my flat in Nima at 2 in the morning, asking Allah for steadiness and clarity. When I finished and sat back, something settled in the room that I noted and immediately set aside. A pressure in the air that was not quite sound and not quite sensation. A weight in the center of my chest that was persistent in the way a voice you are choosing not to hear is persistent. I told myself it was the resistance that comes before difficult, righteous work. I lay down on my mat. I barely slept before Fajr. We arrived at St. Peter's Cathedral at 9:45 on a Sunday morning in October. The Harmattan had just begun, and the air over Accra had that particular dry clarity that makes the city look freshly built. The cathedral was a wide, pale building facing Castle Road, with a wooden cross above the entrance, and people moving steadily up the front steps in their Sunday clothes. Families, elderly couples, children in pressed white shirts being led by the hand. An usher at the door pressed an order of service into my hand with a quiet greeting, and I went inside without meeting his eye. The interior hit me with its smell first, incense and old wood, and something underneath both that I had no name for. Dense and settled, and entirely unlike any other interior I had walked into. The nave was long, and the ceiling was high, and morning light came through the stained glass windows on the south wall, and laid colors across the stone floor that were completely still. The pews were full. At least 500 people settled in the particular quiet that belongs to people who are prepared to be in a place rather than merely present in it. The altar was elevated at the front on 2 steps, dressed in white, candles burning on either side. A man in the row ahead of me had his rosary in his hands, and his lips moving, and the sight of him doing that so openly, with such lack of self-consciousness, produced in me a discomfort I closed down immediately and did not examine. I kept my hand at my side and my eyes on the altar and waited. The priest came to the communion station at 10:20. I stood. We moved into the center aisle together, 7 men, fast and direct toward the altar. The congregation registered us immediately, the low, confused sound of a room whose understanding of itself has just changed, heads turning, a child saying something and being quickly hushed, a woman pressing her hand to her mouth. An usher on the left side of the nave stepped into the aisle and looked at us coming, and then he did what I had not expected. He stepped back to the wall, bowed his head, and prayed where he stood. He did not attempt to stop us. He prayed. The priest at the altar watched us approaching, and he did not lower the host, and he did not step back, and his expression was not what I had prepared myself to face, not alarm, not anger, but something so completely unafraid it was almost disorienting. An elderly woman in the very front pew turned in her seat to face me as I came level with her, and she said in Twi, with a quietness that had no drama in it at all, "Jesus loves you, my son. He already knows why you came." I was past her before she finished the sentence. I reached the altar step. I reached out. I took the host from the vessel. I ran. That is when it happened. The moment that changed everything I believed about God. I made 4 steps. I know it was 4 because I have counted them back in my memory hundreds of times since, and it is always 4. On the 4th step, my legs simply stopped. Not pain, not a physical impact. The instruction from my mind to my legs departed and arrived nowhere, and I was on the floor of St. Peter's Cathedral with the host in my hand before I had any awareness of falling. Behind me I heard it, Kwame, then Musa, then Idris, then the others, going down in sequence. the sound of 7 men's knees finding stone in rapid succession, a sound I will carry in my memory until the day I die. I was on the floor with the host in my open hand, and the heat began. It came from the bread itself, moving through my palm and up through my wrist and into my arm and chest, with the thoroughness of something that had decided to go all the way through. It was not painful. It was the physical experience of being in the presence of something whose scale made everything I thought I knew about the scale of things simply incorrect. Not threatening, not punishing. Enormous in the way that love, when it is large enough, is enormous. Too big to hold, too real to look away from. I looked at what was in my hand. The host was glowing. I will say it as plainly as I can. A white gold light was coming from inside it, steady and sourceless, and entirely unconcerned with whether I found it credible. Kwame said afterward he saw it before his legs gave out. Idris said the light was the first thing he noticed, and the last thing he was able to think clearly about for several minutes. The congregation had gone into a complete silence. Not the silence of shock, but the silence of people who recognize that something is happening that exceeds the category of incident. Then, one voice began to pray, low and steady, somewhere in the middle of the pews, and another joined, and then the whole cathedral was praying together in a continuous sound that had nothing of triumph in it, only the quality of something long hoped for that is finally, actually, arriving. And then the knowing came. Not a voice from outside myself, something that moved through the heat in my chest and arrived complete, the way your own name arrives in a crowded room, already addressed to you, already certain of you, not needing to be argued into anything. I know you, Abdul. Every prayer, every fast, every morning you rose before the light and knelt and gave everything you had to something you loved without knowing its full name. I know you, and I have loved you the entire time, and you have come to exactly the right place. I was weeping. The tears were on the stone floor before I was aware of the feeling behind them. Not grief, not fear, not shame. Something I had no previous experience of. A recognition so complete it bypassed every defense I had. A meeting with something that knew me more accurately than I knew myself, and was not diminished by any of what it knew. I was crying harder than I have ever cried, flat on the floor of a Catholic cathedral in Accra, the host still in my open hand, and I had no desire to stop, and no ability to stop, and no idea how long I stayed that way. The priest came down from the altar. He knelt on the stone beside me. He placed his hand on my shoulder and waited with the patience of a man who knew exactly what was happening and was not in any hurry about it. When my breathing had steadied enough to hear him, he said it quietly, for me. He loves you, son. He has been waiting for you. Ask yourself this question. How do you explain the moment the God you came to prove powerless demonstrates, with perfect specificity, that he has known your name the whole time? When I could stand, I asked the only question left to ask. What do I do now? The priest helped me to my feet. Idris was beside me. Kwame was beside me. 2 other men remained in the building. The priest led us to the front of the nave and he prayed with us. And in that prayer I spoke the most honest sentence of my life. Jesus, I came here today to take you and run, and you brought me to the floor. And I know now that you are real, and I know you have been real the whole time. And I am sorry for everything I brought to this altar today. Forgive me. Take everything I thought I was. I give it to you entirely. 4 of my men gave their lives to Jesus Christ that morning on the floor of St. Peter's Cathedral in Accra, Ghana. I was baptized 10 weeks later and given the name Paul, because, the priest said, Paul also met Jesus in the middle of going the wrong direction at full speed, and was never the same after. Ask yourself this question. Have you ever been going somewhere with complete certainty and had the direction itself turned around beneath your feet? I had no idea what that turning was going to ask me to give up. My father's voice, when it came, was the quietest I had ever heard it, the quiet of a man who was not suppressing anger, but had gone somewhere beyond it. You are no longer my son. You are dead to this family, and to the name of Al-Farouk. Do not come to this house. My mother did not call. She sent my brother with a bag of my belongings, and my brother put it on the step outside my door and left without knocking. Fatu's father sent word through an elder that the engagement was over and I should not attempt any contact. Fatu herself sent one message. I do not know who you are anymore. The organization I had served for 8 years declared me apostate and circulated the declaration. My employer's networks ran through the community and my position ended within 2 months. I received communications that made remaining in Accra a question of safety. I left the city 5 months after my baptism. I lost my father, my mother, my fiancé, my community, my work, and the only city I had ever lived in. All of it surrendered inside a single year. But I gained everything that truly matters. I gained Jesus Christ, forgiveness I had no claim to, peace that had no floor or ceiling, and a love so consistent it has never once wavered based on what I brought to any particular day. I gained a church family who showed me what that consistency looks like in practical, daily, ordinary life. I met a woman named Abina 16 months after my baptism at an evangelical church in Kumasi, where I had resettled. She was a nurse, the daughter of a Ghanaian pastor, a woman who had been praying for a husband who knew what it cost to receive Jesus. When I told her my story, she was quiet for a long time, and then said she believed her prayers had had a specific face in mind. We were married at St. Peter's Cathedral in Accra. I returned for that. The priest who had knelt beside me on the floor officiated. 3 of the men who went down with me that morning stood as my groomsmen. Abina and I have a daughter. The first sounds she heard in the world were not the Adhan. They were her mother thanking Jesus, aloud, in the delivery room. I now carry the testimony of Jesus Christ to Muslim communities across Ghana and West Africa, and in diaspora communities in the United Kingdom. I had no idea, the morning I grabbed the Eucharist and ran 4 steps, that more than 80 Muslims would eventually come to faith in Christ through hearing what happened on that floor. I still write to my parents at Eid and at Christmas. I have received nothing back. I had no idea, on the morning I ran those 4 steps, that I would carry what happened on that floor as the central fact of my life. I pray for them with the discipline they first gave me, and I trust that the God who stopped me on a cathedral floor in Accra is entirely capable of reaching them wherever they are. I returned to that cathedral once, to the exact spot on the floor where my legs had given out. I stood there for a long time. I placed my hand on the stone. The man who grabbed the host and ran no longer exists. In his place stands a follower of Jesus Christ, who would lose every earthly thing again before denying the name of the one who stopped him in his tracks and called him by name and loved him anyway. If Jesus can love someone like me, a man who took what was his and tried to run, then there is no version of your story that places you past his reach. The same Jesus who stopped my legs on that floor is present right now in this testimony, moving toward whatever in you is most certain of itself and most defended. Look inside your own heart right now. Jesus is calling you right now. Not after this, not when the moment is cleaner, but in this exact breath. Will you stop running and let him show you what I found when my legs finally gave out?